Think of the people you interact with every day. Would you want to spend a day in a canoe with them? This show is about hearing stories from exceptional people that can help jumpstart and inspire you to create the life you want. One filled with wealth, wisdom, meaning, and purpose. And that starts with surrounding yourself with the right people. And the people I'm interviewing, I believe you'd want to spend a day with in a canoe. I'm your host, Nathan Mercereau. I'm delighted today to be joined by Jennifer Steiner, CEO of Lightfully Behavioral Health. Jennifer is a seasoned executive in the mental health industry. And Jennifer, welcome to Day in a Canoe podcast. And the whole aspect of mental health has been so amplified given what we've gone through with the pandemic. What are some of the things that you're seeing on that front?
Yeah, well, this is really significant. Some people are calling it sort of the second epidemic in the world, but COVID has really challenged us as humans in so many ways, whether it's fear of the unknown, isolation, but has resulted in an explosion in mental health conditions. And I describe it as sort of twofold. I think one, we're seeing much higher rates of mental health conditions, things including depression, anxiety, even trauma folks are experiencing from living through COVID. But the other thing that we're seeing is an increase in acuity. And what I mean by that is people who may have been struggling with depression, their depression has gotten much worse. So really a need for higher levels of care than folks may have been receiving before.
And so here you are starting a new company, Lightfully Behavioral Health. It sounds like it's much needed. What are you focusing on with this company, and what led to your whole involvement with this initiative?
Yeah, there was a personal story behind this. So I had a family friend whose daughter had experienced a trauma and was going through some really difficult times and said, hey, could you help us, Jennifer, to find a treatment program for our daughter? And I said, sure, of course. I'm a behavioral health care executive. Who better suited to help you? And I started to look for a program for this family, and they were a family that needed to use their insurance for the care, and I couldn't find one. And it shocked me that someone that had the experience that I did couldn't find a program. So I imagined what it must feel like to be someone who doesn't have experience in mental health. So that really was the genesis of Lightfully Behavioral Health. And what we do is we provide mental health services. I call it the middle of the sandwich in levels of acuity for mental health. So if you think about the lowest acuity is your outpatient therapist, your person that you see, once a week, you go in for therapy, you leave. Those folks are really important for treating very mild mental health conditions. But there is a limit to what's possible for them, given the time and the setup of how they provide treatment. At the very high end of the spectrum, or the top of the sandwich, is inpatient psychiatric care. So in the hospital, someone who may be actively suicidal, that very intense, short care. But there's a whole middle place that we serve here at Lightfully Behavioral Health, and it includes care from what we call intensive outpatient services, which will be maybe 3 days a week for 3 to 5 hours a day, to partial hospitalization treatment, which is a little bit of a misnomer. It's a confusing name because it's not in the hospital, but it's maybe 5 to 7 days a week in an outpatient setting where you're getting wraparound care. And then the third is residential treatment, which is 24/7 care in a home-like setting. So we're serving that middle of the sandwich acuity population, and we are serving diagnoses including depression disorders, anxiety disorders, trauma and PTSD disorders, as well as personality disorders like borderline personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder.
So what advice do you give to the individual, the family, the friend group that are really struggling to find how to take the next step around this topic? Because we don't open up our door and kind of announce we're looking for a mental health solution and we're struggling. How do families or individuals take the first step, like just on a very practical basis? How do you advise people when they're kind of caught in that web of questioning what to do.
Yeah, well, and it can be a really overwhelming and scary place when someone you love is struggling and you feel like you can't help them or solve it. So, first of all, I just have a ton of empathy. And I would say that one of the benefits of COVID, if there are benefits of COVID, has been a bit of a lifting of the, I would call, judgment around seeking help for mental health conditions. I think we're seeing a bit more receptivity. So, my first word of advice would be open the door and have an open and honest conversation where you're vulnerable and share your own experiences and destigmatizing what can be a very difficult conversation. So I think that's number one. Secondly, it is usually the case that someone sees an outpatient therapist to do some assessment of how is it going, and that outpatient therapist is able to formulate the right level of care and the right treatment plan for a loved one. However, the reality of things are right now, it's really hard to get into an outpatient therapist. If you've tried to get in one yourself or have someone in your family, they're on wait lists and it's really tough. So in that situation, companies like Lightfully offer free clinical assessments. So you can call in and we'll have a licensed clinician do an assessment of a loved one and help you understand, okay, here's what we would recommend the right course of treatment to be. So I think there are different paths in, but first and foremost, it's just be open, make that connection with your loved one, and do your best to be vulnerable.
For that dynamic where someone who's struggling with mental health may be judging themselves to say, I'm a failure, like I can't, just to go in this direction, even seeking for help, there seems to be this big wall or obstacle. And then also some of the supportive family members feel like they're failing or they're not sufficient in the relationship. Just staying on that practical side, how do you advise people just to take that, lean into that first step?
Yeah, I find it interesting how we've put so much judgment around mental health as a component of our health. I don't think we ever have these thoughts when, I'm starting to have arthritis, and I feel shame around it. So I think a big word of advice is to do your best to consciously decouple these struggles with some kind of thing that you've done or that you did or who you are, and understand that it's a health condition just like all of the physical health conditions. And I think the second part is to sort of open your eyes and look around, that all sorts of humans are facing struggles with mental health, and to the most successful to the least successful, to folks who are wonderful, connected with their family, to those that are isolated. So there is a need, I think, to do some conscious decoupling of some of the judgments and connections that we make related to mental health.
That's good insight. So I know that empowering women is one of your passions, and behind this company launch, you've brought an amazing group of female executives together. What motivated that, and how do you see that as unique?
Oh, great question. Yes, you're right. I think women in leadership has always been a passion of mine. As I've grown up through my own professional career, I have found both exhilaration in being a female in different environments, but also challenges in trying to meld myself into environments that felt a bit unnatural to me. And when I say that, I mean, a lot of companies have been built in what I call a more masculine framework. And I don't even mean man, woman. I mean, because I think men have customarily built companies and been at the leadership levels, the characteristics of those companies have generally been fairly masculine. So let me give you some examples. What I mean by that is, for example, a male, not all men, again, but many males lean more masculine in style, will be more sort of direct and command and control in style than a woman. So I would find myself, sort of in meetings in my earlier careers where I would want to talk a lot, or I would maybe have emotion around something and I would have to rein it in and emulate a kind of behavioral style that didn't feel natural to me. So I always knew that it was going to be a passion of mine when I finally got the ability to build a company myself, to create an environment that was maybe more inclusive of all styles. So we have moments of command and control, but then also that we can have moments of what I would call emotional attunement and collaboration and active communication. So that's been a bit of my journey. With the launch of Lightfully Behavioral Health, I had the opportunity to assemble my executive team from scratch. And I thought, I've always had very female heavy executive teams, but this was a chance to go all in. And so I'm proud to say that we are led by all females. And I think how that translates into the company and what it feels like to be both a client or an employee or a caregiver within our company is, I think you find it's an environment with a bit more nurturing perspective, highly collaborative, I would say, highly communicative. And so I believe that translates beautifully into providing care for people in need.
It's interesting the parallels because in the wealth management space, there's a lot of research about how women are actually better investors than men. And it usually is anchored in just having a more patient approach, a longer term view, not being swayed by headlines or day-to-day changes and trends, but having a more balanced perspective. So it's good to see that materializing in your company as well. So given the whole kind of disruption that's gone on in the world with COVID and the continuing variants, what's it like starting a company in this environment? There's just so many challenges globally, labor shortages, supply chain, inflation, the whole gamut. So what has been your experience?
Yeah, I'd say it's a bit mixed. I mean, on one hand, as we've been talking about, the demand for mental health services is through the roof. And so we're starting a company in an environment where demand is extremely high. So that is a favorable business climate. But you are correct. I think some other issues can be challenging. For us, probably the largest barrier, what I call the longest pole in the tent, is clinical staffing. As I've described, because there's such a demand explosion, clinical therapists and caregivers are full with their private practices. There are not enough of them graduating. There's just a real supply issue there. And so we are spending a lot of time thinking through how to make Lightfully a really attractive place to work and to provide care for clinicians. And that includes, very, very generous benefits packages, thinking through things that really matter and are important to caregivers, as well as building a massively robust and wonderful training program. I think that's heads and shoulders above anything we've seen out there. So we're really trying to stay focused there, as I think that's the biggest, that one's going to be the biggest barrier for us.
And as you look forward into your crystal ball with looking out, say 5 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, what do you anticipate from a trend basis in the industry that you're in? And then what are some of the hopes that you have for how your company will gain traction in that space?
Yeah, well, I think something that I feel really proud of at Lightfully is we've developed a care model that is what I would describe as, it's evidence-based first and foremost, which is critically important. We need to be providing care that we know works, that it can be a little amorphous in mental health. So this is an essential part, is that we are evidence-based, that we are demonstrating efficacy through data. That's another important one. And able to show, here's how someone improved during the course of treatment, and here's how they are staying healthy and well in their lives, and that we're providing care while we're able to be very individualized in the way that we select the different components of treatment. The way that we approach determining the right treatment plan is actually quite consistent and robust and methodical, and that's going to allow us to be really consistent as we grow from state to state, so that when you come to a Lightfully facility in any state, you have a sense of assurance that there's a very methodical way that my treatment plan has been devised, and that I can have a high level of confidence that this is going to help me be better in my life. So I think mental health is entering the world of accountability and consistency that is different than what we've seen before. And I'm glad that we'll be leading that. So.
And if someone's interested in getting in touch with you, either to join your team or to find out more about your services, what's the best step for them to take?
Yeah, well, we are at very easy to remember. We're at lightfully.com, and we're also active on all social media channels. So we invite you to take a look at our website, to join, follow us on social media. We're producing a lot of great content on social media, guidance around navigating mental health in this world today. Lots of good resources. So love to collaborate, love to hear from you, love to offer support for family or yourself.
Jennifer, I want to thank you for leading the charge in a really important initiative at this critical time in our country and the world. And I want to thank you for being a guest today and wish you all the best in the days ahead.
Thank you, Nathan, for having me. And it's a great honor, really, to provide support to folks who need it. So appreciate you helping me get the word out.
Thank you. Thank you for listening and tuning in to Day in a Canoe. We are thrilled to have you as part of our community. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and share it with your friends and loved ones. You can always get more information at dayinacanoe.com. We'll see you next time.